In the far reaches of the galaxy, a small and peaceful alien colony orbited a golden star. The people there, known as the Orlans, lived quiet lives filled with light and song. Their cities floated above oceans that shimmered like glass, and their towers touched the clouds with grace and beauty. For hundreds of years, they believed the universe was kind. They traded with nearby worlds, shared their technology, and trusted that peace would last forever. But peace in space was never guaranteed. One silent night, their skies burned red. Without warning, dark ships appeared out of the void, massive, sharp-edged vessels that moved like predators through the dark. The Orlans had heard stories of the Zarnak Dominion, a violent empire that took what it wanted and left nothing behind. But they never imagined the Zarnak would come for them. The first attack came without a word. Beams of light tore through their defense satellites, and explosions rippled across their floating cities. Panic spread as families rushed for the underground shelters. The colony's council sent messages to every ally they had ever known, pleading for help. "We are under attack," they cried. "Our people are dying. Anyone who can hear this, please respond." They sent the message again and again, hoping someone would answer. But the galaxy had already learned to fear the Zarnak. No one wanted to face them. The Orlan's allies went silent, their signals fading one by one. It felt as if the stars themselves had turned their backs. As the Zarnak ships closed in, the colony's last defense ships took to the sky. They were brave, but they were outnumbered 100 to 1. Their energy shields failed within minutes, and one by one, their ships were reduced to glowing debris. In the chaos, an old engineer named Varen struggled to keep the distress beacon online. He worked with trembling hands, connecting wires and rerouting power, while explosions rocked the base around him. "Someone will hear us," he whispered. "Someone has to." When the power flickered back, the beacon lit up again. The message repeated endlessly, carrying the voice of an Orlan child recorded earlier. Soft, desperate, and full of fear. "Please, help us." That voice traveled across light years of darkness. It passed through dust clouds, dead worlds, and frozen moons. It went farther than any Orlan ship had ever gone. It crossed into human space. On a blue planet called Earth, deep within a quiet military research facility, an analyst named Sophia Lee was monitoring cosmic signals when she noticed something strange. A faint repeating transmission was echoing through the background noise. She filtered the sound, adjusted the frequency, and then froze when she heard the small voice. "Please help us." The words weren't in any known human language, but the pattern was unmistakable. A distress call. Sophia called her superior, and within hours the message reached the Earth Defense Coalition headquarters. Scientists and linguists worked day and night to translate it, and when they finally succeeded, the room fell silent. The message was real. The coordinates were far outside human territory, in a region no Earthship had ever visited. It was not meant for them at all. But that didn't matter. The voice was scared, the tone unmistakable. It was a cry for help. Humanity by then had earned a reputation in the galaxy. Their world, known as Earth, was harsh and dangerous. Every species that studied it called it a death world, a place filled with predators, diseases, and disasters that would kill most alien life in minutes. Yet humans had not only survived there, they had thrived. Their bodies were tough, their minds were stubborn, and their hearts burned with a strange mix of courage and compassion. Other species saw them as unpredictable, sometimes kind, sometimes terrifying. They fought wars with impossible ferocity, but also built hospitals and sent aid to dying planets. They were the species that did not give up, no matter how hopeless things seemed. When Admiral Miguel Reyes received the decoded message, he sat in his dimly lit office, listening to it again and again. The child's voice was faint but clear, filled with panic and trust. It reminded him of his daughter's voice when she was small. The Admiral had fought many battles, but something about this message felt different. It wasn't a call to war, it was a call to humanity. He summoned his advisors and senior officers. The room buzzed with debate. Some argued that it was too dangerous, that the Zarnak Dominion was far beyond their reach. "We can't risk our fleet for a colony we've never met," one commander said. "We have our own people to protect." Another added, "The Zarnak will see this as an act of war." But Reyes didn't move. He looked out the window where the curve of Earth glowed in the distance. "We were the ones who heard," he said quietly. "If we turn away, we're no better than those who didn't answer." The officers fell silent. Everyone in the room knew what he meant. Humanity had been the underdog before. Once weak, once ignored, once desperate. They knew what it was like to call for help and hear nothing back. Maybe that was why humans couldn't ignore a cry like this. Reyes stood and placed his hands on the table. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered. "We move at dawn." Word spread quickly through the Earth defense ranks. Engineers worked double shifts to ready the ships. Pilots checked their fighters, mechanics fueled reactors, and families said quiet goodbyes. The mission was not approved by the Galactic Council. It was a human decision alone. The fleet that would leave Earth wasn't the largest, but it carried something stronger than numbers: the will to do what was right. Among the crews were veterans and rookies alike. Captain Elena Torres, commander of the battleship Horizon, wrote a message to her family before departure. "If we don't make it back, tell them we didn't go to fight. We went to help." On the smaller ship Valiant, a young pilot named James O'Connor cleaned the photo of his late brother and smiled. "This one's for you, Jack," he said softly. Across the fleet, thousands of hearts beat with the same quiet resolve. As dawn broke over Earth, the Deathworlder fleet lifted into orbit. Hundreds of engines lit the sky with blue fire, reflecting off the oceans below. The ships formed a line like silver arrows aimed at the stars. On the command bridge, Admiral Reyes gave a final glance at his planet. "Humanity has come a long way," he murmured. "Let's show them who we really are." With a single command, the fleet jumped into hyperspace. Space folded around them, and in an instant, they vanished into the darkness between stars. Behind them, Earth grew small, a fragile blue dot surrounded by infinite black. Ahead lay the unknown, a colony in need, an enemy waiting, and a chance to prove that even the fiercest species could have a heart. Back on the Orlan colony, Varan watched the skies, his hope fading with every passing hour. The Zarnak fleet hovered above the planet like vultures, their shadow covering the light. He whispered a prayer to the stars, believing no one would come. But far away, through a storm of cosmic dust and light years of silence, a group of humans was already on their way. The call had been heard, and for the first time in a long time, the universe was about to learn what it meant when Earth answered a cry for help. Inside the command center of the Earth Defense Coalition, the air was thick with tension. The room was filled with holographic maps, star charts, and constant voices of officers exchanging updates. Admiral Miguel Reyes stood at the center, looking at the rotating image of a faraway planet, the same one that had sent the desperate cry for help. Around him were men and women who had faced wars, disasters, and unknown dangers. But this situation was different. This wasn't about defending Earth. This was about answering a call from strangers light years away. The scientist had analyzed the signal again and confirmed it came from a region controlled by the Zarnak Dominion, one of the most feared powers in the galaxy. The Zarnak were not conquerors, they were destroyers. Wherever they went, they left behind ashes and silence. Every race that had tried to resist them had fallen. The Galactic Council, the loose alliance of alien nations, had stopped fighting them long ago. Instead, they paid tribute or turned away when someone else was attacked. No one wanted to be next. That was the reason the Aurelians' cries had gone unanswered. Reyes knew this. Every logical reason said Earth should stay out of it. The human colonies were still rebuilding after their last war. Their fleets were strong but limited, and sending them beyond known space could leave Earth exposed. But when he listened to the message, the soft, frightened voice of an Aurelian child, it didn't sound like an alien. It sounded like any child on Earth begging for help. And that was something humanity could never ignore. A late-night emergency meeting was held in the Earth Defense Chamber. The holographic council table flickered with the faces of political leaders from across Earth's nations. Some looked concerned, others furious. President Asha Malik of the coalition spoke first, her voice calm but heavy. "Admiral Reyes," she said, "you understand that entering Zarnak space means declaring war. Are you ready to risk the lives of millions?" Reyes stood straight, his face firm. "Madam President, I don't want war. But if we don't act, that colony will be wiped out. We're the only ones who heard them. If we stay silent, we become the kind of species that watches others die just because they're not one of us." A silence filled the room. The leaders looked at one another, unsure how to respond. It was true that humans had once been seen as dangerous, but in recent years they had tried to change that image, to become protectors, explorers, not aggressors. Going to Zarnak space would undo that progress, but it would also show the galaxy what humanity truly stood for. Finally, the president sighed. "You'll have no official support from the council," she said. "This will be a volunteer mission. You and your crews will go as representatives of Earth, not its conquerors." Reyes nodded. "That's all I need." News spread quickly through the military networks. Volunteers flooded in. Pilots, engineers, medics, and even civilians. Many knew the risks and still signed up. They weren't fighting for glory. They were fighting for a voice that cried for help and for the belief that humanity could be more than its reputation. Among those volunteers was Captain Elena Torres, a seasoned officer who had served with Reyes during the Battle of Titan. She was known for her calm courage and sharp instincts. When she heard the mission details, she simply said, "If Reyes is going, I'm going." She requested command of the battleship Horizon, one of Earth's most advanced vessels. Her crew followed her without hesitation. At the same time, young Lieutenant James O'Connor, a fighter pilot from the colony of New Dublin, was being briefed on the mission. He was only 24, but had already proven himself in several skirmishes. His best friend asked him if he was scared. James grinned and said, "Of course I'm scared. But I'd rather be scared doing something right than safe doing nothing." His words spread through the pilot's network, and soon it became a quiet motto among the crews. In the shipyards above Earth, engineers worked day and night. The hangars buzzed with energy as drones loaded supplies, weapons, and fuel. Families came to say their farewells. Mothers hugged their sons. Wives kissed their husbands. Children waved at the gleaming ships from observation decks. Everyone knew some of them might not return. But there was pride in their eyes. Pride that humanity was standing for something noble. Meanwhile, on the alien side of the galaxy, the Orlans continued to fight for survival. The Zarnak attacks had not stopped. Their skies were filled with smoke, and their once beautiful cities now lay in ruins. The few defense ships that remained were crippled, their captains exhausted and hopeless. Ferran, the old engineer who had kept the distress beacon running, sat by the flickering console staring at the repeating light. He whispered, "Someone will come. Someone must come." But as days turned into weeks, hope faded. The stars above seemed cold and empty. Back on Earth, the fleet's preparations reached their final stage. Admiral Reyes stood on the command deck of his flagship, the ECS Titan, watching as the other ships aligned in formation. Around him, the bridge crew moved quickly but quietly, focused on their tasks. He could see the Earth below, blue and peaceful, unaware of the mission about to begin. He took a deep breath, remembering his daughter's last words before he left. "Dad, bring them home." He turned to his communications officer. "Open a fleet-wide channel." The officer nodded, and the Admiral's voice echoed across hundreds of ships. "Men and women of Earth," he began, "today we step into the unknown. We don't know these people, and they don't know us. But they called for help, and we were the ones who heard. That makes it our responsibility. We don't fight because we love war. We fight because we love life. Every life. Let the galaxy see what it means to be human." There was silence for a few moments after his speech. Then across the fleet, cheers erupted. Pilots saluted, engineers raised their fists, and ships flashed their lights in response. The Deathworlders were ready. Moments later, the countdown began. Engage jump sequence in 10, 9, 8. The bridge lights dimmed as the ships powered up their hyperdrives. Reyes looked at Captain Torres on the monitor. She gave him a steady nod. At 0, the stars stretched into streaks of light and the fleet vanished into the endless dark. The journey was long. Days passed as the ships traveled through the silent corridors of hyperspace. The crew spent their time checking systems, training, and wondering what awaited them on the other side. Some whispered stories about the Zarnak, how they harvested entire worlds and left nothing living behind. Others stayed quiet, lost in thought. During the third night, Admiral Reyes couldn't sleep. He stood alone in the observation chamber, staring at the glowing tunnel outside. Captain Torres joined him quietly. "Thinking about what's waiting for us?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Thinking about what kind of people we are," he replied. She nodded. "Whatever happens, sir, we'll make sure they know who answered their call." On the colony, the last surviving Orlan soldiers prepared for their final stand. Their energy shields were flickering, their ammunition nearly gone. The Zarnak flagship hovered in orbit, preparing to deliver the final strike. Varen stood near the beacon one last time. He touched the console and whispered, "If anyone out there can hear me, we need you now." Far away, in the cold darkness of hyperspace, the human fleet received a faint signal, the same one that had started it all. It repeated endlessly, filled with desperation. The moment Admiral Reyes heard it again, he knew they were close. "Set course for the Aurelian system," he ordered. The stars reappeared as the fleet dropped out of hyperspace. In front of them, the scene was worse than they imagined. The colony's atmosphere burned with smoke and debris floated across space. The Zarnak fleet was massive, their black ships forming a blockade around the planet. Reyes' officers looked at him in shock. "Sir," one said, "there are dozens of them." Reyes clenched his fists. "And there are thousands of us who believe in doing what's right." At that moment, every ship in the Deathworlder fleet powered up its weapons. For the first time, the Zarnak Dominion would face a new kind of enemy. Not one that sought conquest, but one that refused to ignore a cry for help. The decision had been made. Humanity had answered, and soon, the galaxy would learn what it truly meant when Deathworlders came to fight, not for power but for compassion. The darkness of space was filled with fire and silence. The Orleans' homeworld floated below, half covered in clouds of smoke. The Zarnak Dominion's warships hung above the planet like vultures circling a dying creature. Their ships were black and jagged, shaped like blades cutting through the void. Each one was armed with weapons powerful enough to destroy entire cities. They had already broken the colony's defense grid, and now waited for the final order to strike. The surviving Orleans huddled underground, praying that someone, anyone, had heard their call before it was too late. And then, the stars behind the Zarnak fleet began to ripple. Space itself seemed to twist, and bright blue lights cut through the darkness. One after another, enormous ships appeared, sleek, silver, and powerful. The insignia of Earth gleamed on their hulls. The ECS Titan, Horizon Valiant, and dozens more. Humanity had arrived. For a moment, the battlefield went still. The Zarnak fleet's sensors screamed with warnings as hundreds of human ships formed a defensive wall between the planet and the invaders. On the Aurelian colony below, people ran to the surface shelters, staring up at the strange new vessels. They had never seen ships like these, dark and beautiful, alive with light and energy. Some whispered in fear, others in hope. On the bridge of the Titan, Admiral Miguel Reyes stood tall, his eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the enemy's formation. "Open communications," he said. His voice was calm, but everyone on the bridge could feel the weight of the moment. The communications officer nodded, and the Admiral spoke clearly into the void. "This is Admiral Miguel Reyes of the United Terran Fleet. You are attacking a defenseless colony. Cease your assault immediately and withdraw from this system." No reply came for several seconds. Then a deep, distorted voice filled the channel. It was the Zarnak commander. "Humans," it hissed, "this is not your concern. Leave now or you will share their fate." Reyes didn't blink. "You made their safety our concern the moment we heard their call." He turned to his officers. "Raise shields. Arm all weapons." The Zarnak ships began to move, forming attack lines. The space between the two fleets glowed with tension, a silent storm waiting to break. Captain Elena Torres on the horizon gave the order to her crew. "All stations ready. Target their forward cruisers. Let's show them what Earth can do." Her voice carried both strength and pride. The first shot came from the Zarnak flagship, a blinding red beam that tore through the void and struck one of the smaller human frigates. The explosion shook the entire formation. At once, the Deathworlder fleet responded. Blue-white energy lances erupted from the human ships, slicing through the enemy lines. The battle had begun. It was chaos. Hundreds of ships fired simultaneously, lighting up the dark like 1,000 suns. The Zarnak had numbers, but the humans had precision and courage. They fought like no one the aliens had ever seen. Every time a human ship was hit, another moved forward to cover it. Pilots flew their fighters through impossible maneuvers, dodging plasma bolts and diving straight into enemy fire. Lieutenant James O'Connor led one of the fighter squadrons. His small craft darted between the massive ships, weaving through debris and flames. "Lock on target Delta 5, he said over the comms. "Let's clip their wings." His team fired a wave of missiles that hit a Zarnak cruiser's engines, sending it spiraling out of control. "That's one less monster to worry about," he said with a grin even as his ship shook from the shockwaves. On the ground, Varen and a group of Orlans watched the sky flash with bursts of light. "Who are they?" one young soldier asked. Varan smiled weakly, tears glistening in his eyes. "They're the ones who answered." For the first time in weeks, the people of the colony felt hope. Back in orbit, the human fleet pushed forward. Admiral Reyes studied the tactical map. The Zarnak were still strong, but they were losing formation. He saw an opening. "All ships focus fire on their command vessel," he ordered. "Break their chain of command." Captain Torres responded immediately. "Aye, Admiral." Target locked. The Horizon's main cannon powered up, glowing bright blue as it drew energy from the ship's core. With a thunderous blast, it fired. The beam tore through the void and struck the Zarnak flagship directly in its center. The enemy's shields flared, then collapsed. The ship exploded in a shower of fire and metal, its shockwave rippling across the battlefield. The destruction of the flagship stunned the Zarnak fleet. For the first time, their formations wavered. Some began to retreat. Others fired wildly in confusion. Reyes seized the moment. "Press the advantage. Don't let them regroup." The humans moved like a single organism. They weren't the most advanced species, but they fought with heart. Engineers rerouted power from damaged systems to weapons. Medics worked in the middle of battle, saving injured crew members while explosions shook their decks. When a human ship was destroyed, nearby vessels immediately recovered its escape pods, refusing to leave anyone behind. The Zarnak, who were used to fear and surrender, didn't know how to fight against this kind of unity. The battle raged for hours. Space was filled with drifting wreckage, glowing debris, and the echoes of explosions. Many human ships were badly damaged, but none retreated. The Deathworlders refused to back down. On the Titan, alarms blared as enemy fire struck the hull. Sparks flew across the bridge. "Shields down to 30%, shouted the officer. Reyes held onto the railing and shouted, "Divert auxiliary power from life support. Keep the weapons online." "But sir, that's an order." The crew obeyed. Even as the air grew thin and lights dimmed, the Titan kept fighting. It turned toward another Zarnak destroyer and unleashed a final barrage of plasma torpedoes. The enemy ship exploded, lighting up the entire sector. Down below, the Orlans watched in awe. They had seen many wars, but never one like this. These humans were not fighting for conquest or reward. They were fighting because it was right. Every explosion in the sky was proof that someone, somewhere, cared enough to bleed for them. At last, the Zarnak line broke completely. Their surviving ships began to pull back, jumping into hyperspace one after another. The battlefield went quiet except for the faint crackle of dying fires and broken comm signals. The humans had done the impossible. Admiral Reyes slumped back into his chair, exhausted. His uniform was burned, his hands shaking. "Status report," he said quietly. "Enemy fleet in full retreat," replied his first officer. "We've lost 9 ships, but the colony is safe." Reyes closed his eyes for a moment and whispered, "We heard their call and we answered." On the horizon, Captain Torres stood at the viewport looking at the damaged but victorious fleet. "We came all this way for strangers," she said softly, "and somehow it feels like we found ourselves." Meanwhile, on the colony, Varen stepped out of the shelter and gazed up at the quiet sky. The smoke was clearing and the stars shone again. "They came," he whispered. "They really came." Around him, the Oralans wept and cheered. Children pointed at the human ships still orbiting above like guardian angels. The humans began landing relief teams to help rebuild. Medics treated wounded Orlans, engineers restored power, and translators tried to communicate. There were no barriers, only gratitude and awe. The once feared Deathworlders had proven that even the most dangerous species could choose kindness. As the sun rose over the recovering colony, Admiral Reyes recorded a message to Earth. His voice was tired but proud. "Mission accomplished. The Zarnak have been driven out. Casualties are heavy, but morale is high. The Orlans are alive. And the galaxy has seen that humanity stands for more than survival. We stand for hope." He ended the transmission and looked out into space where the debris of battle floated silently. For the first time in years, he felt something deep inside him. Peace. Humanity had shown its strength not through destruction, but through compassion. The universe would never be the same again. The Deathworlders had arrived, and their message was clear. When Earth heard a cry for help, it didn't turn away. It answered with fire, courage, and an unbreakable heart. The battle had ended, but the war inside every heart was not over yet. Space around the Orellan colony was a graveyard of burning ships and drifting wreckage. The silence that followed the chaos was heavy. Human and Zarnak debris floated side by side, glowing faintly under the light of the distant sun. On the surface below, the Orellans came out of their shelters, still afraid to believe that it was really over. The smell of smoke and metal filled the air, but above them, they could see the human fleet still standing guard, protecting the planet they had nearly died to save. Admiral Miguel Reyes stood on the bridge of his ship, the Titan, staring at the battlefield. The screens around him showed the damage reports. 27 ships heavily damaged, hundreds of wounded, and 9 lost completely. The crew was exhausted, their uniforms torn and burned, but there was pride in every face. They had done what no one thought was possible. Humanity had fought one of the galaxy's strongest empires and survived. "Sir," said his communication officer softly, "the Zarnak fleet has retreated beyond scanner range." "We've won." Reyes didn't smile. He simply nodded and said, "No one wins in war, Ensign. But today, we saved lives." He walked slowly toward the viewport. The light from the burning wrecks reflected in his tired eyes. Every explosion he had ordered still echoed in his mind. For every enemy ship they had destroyed, he knew there were lives lost. Zarnak soldiers, human pilots, innocent colonists caught in between. Yet deep down, he knew this battle would be remembered for something far greater than destruction. It would be remembered as the day the Deathworlders chose mercy over fear. Captain Elena Torres on the horizon was coordinating the rescue operations. Her ship had taken heavy hits during the fight, but her crew refused to rest. They sent shuttles to collect wounded soldiers, both human and Orellan. The medical bays overflowed with injured, yet no one complained. A young medic named Arjun worked tirelessly, patching up burns and stabilizing pilots pulled from the wreckage. When one Orellan soldier opened his eyes and whispered, "Why did you come for us?" Arjun smiled faintly and said, "Because someone had to." Down on the colony, Varan stood in the remains of his workshop, watching human landing crafts descend like falling stars. The air shimmered as engines roared, and soon, teams of humans in gray suits were on the ground setting up tents, generators, and medical stations. The Orellans gathered around them, hesitant at first, unsure how to react to these strange, rough-faced beings who had arrived from the stars. Then something simple broke the tension. A small Orellan child, covered in dust, ran up to a human soldier and offered him a glowing flower. The soldier, surprised, knelt and smiled, gently taking the flower. The moment was small but powerful. The crowd of Orellans cheered softly. They realized that their saviors were not gods or conquerors, but people, strong, tired, and kind. Over the next few days, the humans and Orellans worked together to rebuild. The colony's power grid was restored using human reactors. Food and medical supplies were distributed freely. Where there had once been fear, now there was cooperation. Varan helped human engineers repair damaged systems, explaining the colony's structures while they shared their own technology in return. The two species who had never met before now worked side by side like old allies. Admiral Reyes spent his days between the command ship and the ground base. He met with the Orellan leaders, who struggled to find the words to thank him. Their leader, a gentle being named Sarai, stood before him with tears in her eyes. "We called for help, but we never imagined that anyone would come." "Why did you?" she asked quietly. Reyes looked at her for a long time before answering. "Because once, long ago, we were the ones who needed help and no one came. We decided that if we ever heard someone cry out like we did, we'd answer." Sarai bowed deeply. "You are not Deathworlders," she said softly. "You are protectors." Reyes smiled for the first time since the battle. "Maybe both," he said. Meanwhile, aboard the Horizon, Captain Torres visited the observation deck where the crew had gathered to honor those lost. They floated small capsules containing names of fallen soldiers into space. The capsules glowed blue as they drifted away, joining the stars. Torres spoke quietly to her crew. They fought not for conquest or pride, but for strangers they never met. That's what makes them heroes. Lieutenant James O'Connor stood among the pilots, his arm bandaged and his flight suit torn. He had lost his best friend during the fight, a pilot named Marco whose fighter was destroyed while protecting the Valiant. James clenched his fists as he watched the glowing capsules drift. "He'd have loved to see this," he whispered. Captain Torres placed a hand on his shoulder. "He already does," she said. The Zarnak Dominion, humiliated by their defeat, sent no further attacks. Their retreat left a message echoing across the galaxy. Earth was not to be underestimated. But it wasn't fear that spread among the other civilizations. It was respect. Stories of the Deathworlders' courage traveled fast. Traders and travelers spoke of how humans had fought not for gain but for empathy. They called them the warriors with hearts of fire. On the Orellan homeworld, children began to paint murals of the battle. They showed human ships surrounded by light, shielding their planet from darkness. The name Earth became a word of hope whispered like a prayer. For the first time in generations, the galaxy saw humans not as predators but as guardians. Yet even as celebrations began, the humans knew they had to leave soon. Their ships were damaged, their supplies low, and their people weary. Admiral Reyes called a final meeting with the Orellan Council. "You're safe now," he said. "We've set up defense satellites and left enough supplies to rebuild. But we can't stay forever. You must rebuild and stand strong. The next time someone cries for help, maybe it'll be you who answers." Sarai smiled sadly. "You gave us more than safety," she said. "You gave us courage." Before departure, the Orellans held a ceremony to honor their human saviors. They built a monument from the metal remains of fallen ships, half Zarnak, half human. At its center, they engraved words in both languages. They came when no one else would. The fleet prepared to return home. Engines hummed softly as ships powered up for the jump back to Earth. On the bridge of the Titan, Reyes looked out one last time at the Orellan planet, now shining peacefully below. Captain Torres' voice came through the comms. "All ships ready for departure, Admiral." Reyes gave a faint nod. "Let's go home." But as the countdown began, a final transmission came through from the surface. It was Varan's voice. "Admiral, this is Varan of the Orellan colony. Before you leave, I want you to know something. You didn't just save our people. You changed us. You made us believe again. Wherever you go, the stars will remember that Earth answered." Reyes smiled, his eyes glistening. "And Earth will remember you," he replied. "Stay strong, my friend." With that, the fleet engaged their hyperdrives. One by one, the ships vanished into streaks of light, leaving the planet behind but carrying its gratitude forever. The Orellans stood on the surface, watching the skies long after the ships disappeared. They knew they had witnessed something that would echo through generations, a moment when hope had returned to the galaxy. Back aboard the Titan, the crew settled into quiet reflection as they traveled home. The medics tended to the wounded. Engineers repaired damaged systems, and the soldiers who had survived sat in silence, thinking about what they had seen. Humanity had faced death and darkness but had chosen compassion. It was not victory that filled their hearts. It was pride. Admiral Reyes stood alone in the viewing deck, gazing into the endless stars. His uniform was torn, and his face was lined with fatigue, but there was peace in his eyes. He thought of the Orellan child's voice, the one that had started it all, and how it had reached across the stars to touch something deep inside him. He whispered softly to himself, "We came as warriors, but we leave as something more." As the fleet continued its long journey home, the galaxy whispered their story. On distant worlds, beings spoke of the day humans arrived from the blue planet, a species from a world so dangerous that even their plants tried to kill them, yet capable of a kindness stronger than fear. The Zarnak Dominion had learned to fear the Deathworlders, but the rest of the galaxy had learned to believe in them. And somewhere, far from Earth, a small Orellan child looked up at the stars and said to her mother, "When I grow up, I want to be like them." Her mother smiled and held her close. "Then the universe will be safe," she said. Months had passed since the great battle on the Orellan colony. The human fleet had returned to Earth, their ships scarred but their spirits strong. The memory of what they had done was still fresh in everyone's minds. Across the galaxy, stories of the Deathworlders spread like wildfire, tales of humans who had crossed the stars to save strangers. Yet back on Earth, the soldiers and officers who had lived through it all were trying to return to normal life. Though nothing about them felt normal anymore, Admiral Miguel Reyes sat in his office at Earth Command, watching a news broadcast on the screen. Reporters were showing images of the rebuilt Orellan colony, cities glowing with new light, children playing near memorials and banners with the symbol of Earth beside the Orellan emblem. The words below the image read, "United under the stars, a new era of hope." Reyes turned off the screen and leaned back in his chair. The sound of victory had been replaced by silence, but inside him, he could still hear the echoes of the battle, the screams, the explosions, the last words of his fallen crew. There was a knock at his door. "Come in," he said. Captain Elena Torres entered carrying a small metal box. Her uniform was crisp, but her eyes were tired. She had been promoted since the battle, but like Reyes, she carried the same heavy memories. "Admiral," she said softly, placing the box on his desk. "We finished gathering the personal effects of the lost. Thought you'd want to see them before they go to their families." Reyes nodded, opening the box slowly. Inside were small tokens, dog tags, photos, a child's drawing, a ring, a worn-out wristwatch. Every object told a story. He picked up one photo of a smiling young man in a pilot's suit. Lieutenant Marco, James O'Connor's best friend. Reyes looked at it for a moment, then whispered, "They gave everything for people they didn't even know." Torres sat down across from him. "They'd do it again," she said quietly. "We all would." Reyes gave a faint smile. "I know, that's what makes us dangerous. And beautiful." Outside the office, the world had changed. The people of Earth had started to see themselves differently. For centuries, humanity had been known for war and greed, but now they were known for courage and compassion. Other alien species began sending messages of friendship and alliance. Some wanted trade, others wanted peace treaties, but most simply wanted to meet the humans who had risked their lives for strangers. In the United Galactic Council, ambassadors from different planets met for the first time with human representatives. The Orlan leader, Sarai, stood before the assembly, her voice clear and filled with emotion. "When our world burned," she said, "no one came to help us. No one, except them, the Deathworlders from Earth. They came not as conquerors, but as protectors. They gave us back our future." Her words brought the entire hall to silence. Then slowly, every representative in the chamber stood and bowed their heads in respect to the humans. Back on Earth, James O'Connor had left the military. He could no longer stand the sound of engines or the smell of burnt metal. Instead, he spent his days teaching at a flight academy, training new recruits. He taught them not just how to fly, but why to fly. Courage, he told his students, isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are. The young cadets listened to him with awe, knowing they were learning from a man who had seen the stars at war and still believed in peace. One evening, James stood on a hill outside the academy, looking up at the night sky. The stars shimmered softly above him. He raised a small glass of whiskey toward them. "Here's to you, Marco," he said quietly. "We made it back, and they're safe." Thousands of light years away on the Orlan colony, life had bloomed again. The once broken cities were now alive with color and music. Farron walked through the new marketplace, smiling at the sight of his people laughing again. Humans had left behind machines and knowledge that helped the Orlans rebuild faster than anyone thought possible. In the center of the colony stood the great monument, built from the wreckage of ships. The words engraved on it still shone bright. They came when no one else would. Farron often brought his daughter to the monument. The little girl always looked up at the sculpture of human and Orlan hands reaching for each other. "Father," she asked one day, "will they ever come back?" Farron smiled. "Maybe not soon," he said, "but they will always watch over us from the stars. And one day, when someone else cries for help, it will be our turn to answer." The idea of unity spread quickly. The humans and Orlans began building something greater together, a defense alliance called the Stellar Accord. It wasn't about power or control. It was about protection, about making sure no one would ever be alone again when danger came. Other species soon joined, inspired by what had happened. For the first time in galactic history, worlds that had once distrusted each other now worked as one. Admiral Reyes and Captain Torres became the founding members of the Accord's Council. They traveled from world to world, speaking about peace, cooperation, and the strength of compassion. Every time they landed on a new planet, people would cheer and welcome them as heroes. But Reyes always told them, "We're not heroes. We just did what we hoped someone else would do for us." One day, after a long session with the Council, Reyes received a private transmission. It was from Varan. The hologram flickered to life, showing the Orlan engineer smiling warmly. "Admiral," he said, "we've begun building a ship of our own. We've named it the Dawn of Earth. It will carry our message to other worlds, the message that no one is too small to be worth saving." Reyes felt a deep sense of pride. "Then maybe this is what it was all for," he said quietly to himself after the transmission ended. Not just survival, but connection. Years passed and the galaxy slowly healed. The Zarnak Dominion, once feared across the stars, now avoided conflict. They had seen what humanity could do when provoked. But more importantly, they had seen what humanity would do when inspired. They began peace talks through the Stellar Accord, and although trust took time, even they began to change. Back on Earth, the people began to look toward the stars not with fear, but with purpose. Spaceports grew busier, and children dreamed of becoming explorers instead of soldiers. The story of the Orlan rescue became part of school lessons, told not as a tale of war, but of compassion. Statues were built, books were written, and even songs were sung about the day humanity answered a call for help. Admiral Reyes, now older and gray-haired, retired to a quiet home by the sea. Every morning he watched the sunrise and thought about the stars beyond it. Captain Torres often visited him, bringing news of the Accord's progress. One afternoon she arrived with a small gift, a piece of metal from the Orellan monument. "They wanted you to have this," she said. "They say it's from the part of the sculpture that represents Earth." Reyes held it gently, feeling its cool weight in his hands. "Strange," he murmured. "We fought a war, and this is what it became, a piece of peace." That evening, as the sun set, he walked along the shore. The sky turned orange and gold, and for a moment he imagined he could see the faint glimmer of ships passing overhead, crossing between worlds. He smiled softly, whispering, "Wherever you are, keep shining." Far away, the Orlan child who once gave a human soldier a glowing flower was now grown. She stood aboard the Dawn of Earth, preparing for her first mission into deep space. In her hand, she still carried a pressed version of that flower, old but preserved. Before launch, she looked up at the stars and whispered, "For Earth." Then the engines roared and the ship lifted off, heading toward the unknown, carrying with it the promise of unity born from sacrifice. The galaxy had changed forever. What began as a desperate cry for help had turned into a story of hope that spanned generations. Humanity, once seen as a race from a dangerous planet, had become the heart of something beautiful, a living proof that even in the darkest parts of the universe, there existed a light strong enough to reach across the stars. And so the legend of the Deathworlders lived on, not as destroyers but as saviors, protectors, and friends. Wherever their story was told, people remembered that the most dangerous world in the galaxy had also given birth to its bravest hearts.